Hello, I'm Luke, and welcome back to our reading of Mary Jones and Her Bible. We're doing this for Children's Book Week because, of course, we at Sonlight here love reading aloud to kids. We think that's a wonderful thing. If you didn't catch yesterday's reading, be sure to go back and watch that. One of the things that's so great about reading aloud together as a family is that you can talk about things, like what Mary Jones has already taught us, about how the Bible is a light to our lives and how she has this deep passion for helping others with the things that she's learned. And so we want to pass that on as well. So what are some of the things that you guys talked about as a family after you listened to the reading yesterday? I'm really curious to know. So please leave some comments about that, and we'll get going with today's reading as well. Yeah, let's enjoy. Chapter 3, A Surprise. Please let me learn and not grow up in darkness, Mary prayed. 2 years passed since Mrs. Evans' visit, and still Mary's prayer seemed as far as ever from being answered. With greater understanding and patience, Mary went about her daily duties. Even though she was young, her mother depended on her for many things, and Mary had less time for dreaming. Though Kadir Idris was still the spot with which her imagination associated Bible scenes and pictures, she had little time to spare for anything but her everyday duties. Mary still went with her mother to the midweek meetings at the farm in Leckworth. From coming into contact with older people rather than children of her own age, she would have been called an old-fashioned girl if she had lived in a place where any difference was known between old fashions and new. One evening, a good friend and neighbor came back from Abergoylan, a village 2 miles away from Pfaffenhengel. He had been selling the woolen cloth that Molly had been making during the past months. Mary, whose observant eye was sure to note the slightest sign of excitement in every visitor's face and manner, sprang up and stood before him, regarding his face searchingly. "What is it?" she asked. "Something pleasant has happened. I know it." "What a sharp little girl you have, Molly," the neighbor replied. "And is it something that concerns me?" Mary asked. "It is something that concerns you most of all." "What can it be?" Mary murmured with a little sigh. "Yes, what is it?" Mrs. Jones asked, sounding quite impatient herself. "We both want to know." "Well," the friend replied, "what would you say, Molly, to your daughter here becoming quite a scholar, perhaps knowing how to read and write, and all a deal better than people like us ever did?" "A school?" The exclamation came from Mary, who, in her excitement, now stood breathless with suspense, her hands closely clasped. The friend looked at her a moment, without speaking. Then he said, "There is a school to be opened in Abergoylan, and a master is chosen already. And as you think not of 2 miles' walk, if your mother allows it, Mary, you will be able to go and learn all you can. You are pleased, are you not?" There was a pause. Then Mary's reply came low, spoken, but with such deep feelings in its tones. "Pleased? Yes, indeed, for now I shall learn to read the Bible." Then a thought struck her, and a shadow crossed her face as she said, "But, Mother, perhaps you will not be able to spare me?" "Spare you? Yes, I will, child, though I cannot deny as how it will be difficult for me to do without you as my right hand and help. But for your good, my girl, I would do harder things than that." "Dear, good mother," Mary cried, putting an arm around Molly's neck and kissing her. "But I don't want you to work too hard and tire yourself. I'll get up an hour or two earlier and do all I can before the start of school." Then, as the excited girl sat down again to her work, her heart, in its joyfulness, sent up a song of thanksgiving to the Lord who had heard her prayer, and was now opening the way for her to learn, that she might not grow up in darkness. Presently the visitor spoke again. "I went to see the room where the school is to be held, and who should come in while I was there but Mr. Charles of Bala. I have often heard of him, but I have never seen him, and I was glad to set eyes on him for once." "What was he like?" Molly asked. "Well, I never was a good one for describing faces, but I should say that he is between 40 and 50 years old, and has a fine big forehead that doesn't look as though it had unfurnished apartments to let behind it, but quite the opposite, as though he had done a sight of thinking and meant to do a great deal more. But his face isn't anything so very special till he smiles. Then it's like sunshine that goes to your heart and warms you right through. Now I've seen him and heard him speak, I can understand how he does so much good. I hear he's going about from place to place opening schools for the poor children who would grow up ignorant otherwise." "Like me," Mary murmured under her breath. "And who is the master that is to be set over the school at Abergoylan?" Molly asked. "I heard tell his name's John Ellis," said the neighbor. "A good man, and right for the work, so they say, and I hope it will prove so." "And how soon will the school be open?" Mary wanted to know. "In about 3 weeks, I believe," the neighbor said. The following 3 weeks passed more slowly for Mary Jones than any 3 months she could remember before. The long wait showed itself in impatience. Her home duties at this time were not done so cheerfully or so quickly as usual, for her thoughts were far away, her heart being set on the thing that she had longed for so much. "If this is the way it's going to be," her mother said one evening, "I shall wish that there had never been a thought of a school at Abergoylan. Mary, you're so off your head that you go about like someone in a dream. What will it be like when school begins? I dare not think." The longest 3 weeks that Mary had ever spent came to an end at last, and she began to go to school, taking a very important step forward. What other children called hard work was to Mary only pleasure, and her eagerness was so great that in an incredibly short time she began to read and write. John Ellis, the schoolmaster, had a quick eye for seeing the character and the talents of his pupils. He encouraged Mary in the school, and the girl repaid the master's kindness by working hard and willingly. Molly Jones could find no fault now with Mary's performance in her home duties. She rose early and did her work before breakfast, and after her return from school in the afternoon she again helped in the home, only keeping for herself time enough to prepare her school lessons for the next day. At school she was well liked and never seemed to be regarded with jealousy by her companions, because of the kind way in which she was willing to help others whenever she could. One morning a small girl was crying when she reached school. On being questioned as to what it was the matter, she said that on the way a big dog had snatched the paper bag in which she was bringing her dinner. The dog had carried it off, and so she would be hungry all day. Some of the children laughed at the girl for her carelessness, and called her a coward for not running after the dog and getting her dinner back. But Mary whispered something in the girl's ear, dried the wet eyes, and presently the girl was smiling and happy again. When dinner time came, Mary and the dinnerless child sat close together in the corner, and about half of Mary's provisions found their way to the smaller child. The other scholars looked on, apparently feeling ashamed that none but Mary Jones had thought of doing so kind and neighborly an action, at the cost of a little self-denial. But the lesson was not lost upon them, and often Mary's influence made itself felt in the school for good. On another occasion, Mary was getting ready to set off on her 2-mile journey home when she spied in a corner of the now deserted schoolroom a young boy with a book open before him and a smeared slate and blunt pencil by his side. Tears were falling over his unfinished task, and evidently he was in the last stages of despair. He had dawdled away his time during the school hours, and had not listened when the lesson had been explained. The strict school discipline required that he should stay behind when the rest had gone, and attend to the work that he had left unfinished. Mary had a headache that day, and was longing to get home. But the sight of that tearful face in the corner banished all thoughts of herself, and so as the voices of the other children died away in the distance, she crossed the room and leaned over the boy's shoulder. "What is it, Robbie? Oh, I see, you've got to do that sum. I mayn't do it for you, you know, because that would be a sort of cheatin', but I can tell you how to do it yourself, and I think I can make it plain." So saying, Mary fetched a little bit of wet rag and washed the slate, and then got out an old knife and sharpened the pencil. "Now," she said, smiling cheerily, "I'll put down the sum as it is in the book." Then she wrote on the slate, in clear, if not very elegant figures, the sum in question. Encouraged now, Robbie gave his mind to the task, and with a little help it was soon done, and Mary, with a light heart which made up for her heavy head, set off home, very glad that what she herself was learning could be a help to others. Not long after the start of this day school, a Sunday school also was opened. The very first Sunday that children were taught there, Mary appeared as clean and fresh as soap and water could make her. Bright eyes and an eager face showed the keen interest she felt and her deep wish to learn. That Sunday evening, after service in the chapel, as Mrs. Evans, the farmer's wife, was just going to get into her pony cart to drive home, she felt a light touch on her arm. A young voice she knew said, "Please, may I speak to you a moment?" "Surely, my child," the woman replied, turning her smiling, friendly face to Mary. "What have you got to say to me?" "2 years ago, please, you were so kind as to promise that when I learned to read you would let me come to the farm and read your Bible." "I did. I remember it well," Mrs. Evans said. "Well, child, do you now know how to read?" "Yes, I do," Mary responded. "And I've joined the Sunday school, so there is a Bible lesson to prepare. And if you would be so kind as to let me come up to the farm one day each week, perhaps Saturday when I have a half holiday, I could never thank you enough." "There's no need for thanks, Mary. Come and welcome. I shall expect you next Saturday, and may the Lord make His word a great blessing to you. But please remember to take your clogs off at the door." Mrs. Evans held Mary's hand one moment. Then she got into her cart, and the pony started off quickly towards home, as though he knew that old Farmer Evans was laid up with rheumatism, and that his wife wished to get back to him as soon as possible. Chapter 4. 2 miles to a Bible. Mr. Evans' farm was a curious, old-fashioned place. The house was a large rambling building with many odd ups and downs, and windows in all sorts of unexpected places. And yet there was a homely comfort not always to be found in far finer and more imposing houses. At the back were the outbuildings, the sheds and cow-houses, the poultry pen, the stables and pigsties. Stretching away beyond these again were the home paddock, the drying ground, and the small enclosed field that went by the name of hospital meadow because it was used for sick animals that needed a rest. It was the farmer, Mr. Evans, who had spoken so kindly to Mary in the meeting house at Leckworth long ago, and he was still the same good, honest, industrious, God-fearing man, never forgetting in his work what he owed to the Giver of all, who sends his rain for the watering of the seed, and his sun for the ripening of the harvest. Nor did he find fault with God if the rain came down upon the hay before it was safely stored, or if an early autumn gale laid his wheat level with the earth from which it sprang, before the sickle could be put to it for harvest. Nor did he complain and grumble, even when disease showed itself among the cattle and sheep of which he was justly proud. In short, he was contented with what the Lord sent and with what the Lord allowed. Mr. and Mrs. Evans had 3 children. The oldest, a girl, was already grown up and a great comfort and help to her mother. The younger children were boys who went to a grammar school in a town a little distance away. Mary remembered to remove her muddy clogs at the door, and was welcomed to the family with love and kindness. But she was shy and timid the first time, for the farmhouse was a much finer place than any home she had previously seen. Yet there was an atmosphere of warmth, and there were signs of plenty which were unknown in Mary Jones's poor cottage, where there was nothing more than the barest of essentials. But Mary's shyness did not last long. "Come in, my girl," Mrs. Evans said, drawing Mary into the cozy old-fashioned kitchen that had a little kettle singing on the hob. The low-ceilinged room was filled with an enticing fragrance of currant shortcake, baking for an early tea. "There, get warm, dear," Mrs. Evans continued, "and then you shall go into the parlor and look in the Bible. And have you brought a pencil and some paper to take notes if you want them?" "Yes, thank you. I brought them with me," Mary replied. For a few minutes she sat there, basking in the pleasant cheery glow of the firelight. Then she was shown into the parlor, where, on the table at the center of the room, was the precious book covered with a clean white cloth. The white cloth was not a sign that the Bible was never used. On the contrary, it was always read at prayers night and morning, for the family loved to study God's Word and seek to understand its teachings. "There's no need to tell you to be careful with the Bible and to turn over the pages gently, Mary, I am sure," Mrs. Evans said. "You would do that anyway, I know. And now I will leave you and the Bible together. When you've learned your lesson for Sunday school and read all you want, come back to the kitchen and have some tea before you go." Then the farmer's wife went away, leaving Mary alone with a Bible for the first time in her life. It was several minutes before she could bring herself to raise the white cloth. At last, folding it neatly, Mary laid it on one side. Then, with trembling hands, she opened the book. opened it to the 5th chapter of John, and her eyes caught these words: "You study the Scriptures because you think that in them you will find eternal life, and these very Scriptures speak about me." John 5:39. I will search," she cried, sensing that although the words had first been spoken to Jesus by Jesus to people who would not accept him, they were now being spoken directly to her by her heavenly Father in his love. "I will search and learn all I can. Oh, if I had a Bible of my own!" And this wish, this prayer for the rare and coveted treasure, was a single note in a symphony which, years after, spread in volume until it rolled in waves of sound over the whole earth. This longing in a little girl's heart was destined to play a part in bringing light and knowledge to millions of souls in the future, a work whose importance is not to be calculated on this side of eternity. When Mary had finished studying the Bible lesson for the Sunday and had enjoyed a good meal in the cozy kitchen, she said goodbye to her friends and set off home. Her mind was full of one great longing, out of which a resolution was slowly shaping itself. And then it was formed at last. "I will have a Bible of my own," she said, surprising herself with the loudness of her voice. "I must have one, if I save up for it 10 years. And by the time the plan had settled in her mind, Mary reached her home. Christmas came, and with it some holidays for Mary and other scholars who attended the school at Abergwyllyn. Mary would have been sorry that lessons stopped, had it not been that during the holidays she determined to carry out her plan for earning something towards buying her Bible. Without neglecting her home duties, Mary managed to take on work for neighbors. Many were glad to give her a small sum of money. Now it was to mind a baby while the mother was at the washtub, now to pick up sticks and brushwood in the woods for fuel, or to help mend a patch of garments for families for a weary mother who was thankful to give a small sum for this welcomed help. And every halfpenny, every farthing was put into a small wooden box. Mary kept the box in a cupboard on a shelf where she could reach it, and it was a real and heartfelt joy to her when she could bring her day's earnings, the smallest copper coins perhaps, and drop them in, longing for the time when they would have swelled to the required sum, a very large sum, unfortunately, for buying a Bible. Then one day Mrs. Evans, knowing Mary's great wish, and wanting to encourage her and help her, made her the present of a fine cockerel and 2 hens. "Oh, no, dear, don't thank me," she said, when Mary was trying to tell her how grateful she was. "I've done it, first, to help you along with that Bible you've set your heart on, and then, too, because I love you and like to give you pleasure. So now, my child, when the hens begin to lay, which they will in early spring, you can sell your eggs, for these will be your very own to do with what you like with, and you can put the money to any use you please. And I think I know what you'll do with it," Mrs. Evans added with a smile. It happened that the first silver coin that Mary had the satisfaction of dropping into her box was earned before she had any eggs to sell. It came in quite a different way from the sums which she had so far received. She was walking home one evening along the road from Twin where she had been sent on an errand. While looking across at the mountains, her foot struck up against an object in the road. Stooping to pick it up, she found it was a large leather purse. Wondering whose it could be, Mary went on until within a half-mile of home she met a man walking slowly and evidently searching for something. He looked up as Mary approached, and she recognized him as Farmer Greaves, a relative of Mrs. Evans. "Ah, good evening, Mary Jones," he said. "I've had such a loss. Coming home from market, I dropped my purse and—" "I've just found a purse," Mary said. "Is this it?" "You found a purse?" the farmer exclaimed eagerly. "Yes, indeed, my dear, that is mine, and I'm very much obliged to you. No, stay a moment," he called after her, for Mary was already trudging off again. "I should like to give you a trifle for your just a trifle by way of thanks." As he spoke, his finger and thumb closed on a bright shilling, which surely would not have been too much to give to a poor child who had found a heavy purse. But he thought better, or worse of it, and took out instead a silver 6-pence and handed it to Mary, who took it with very heartfelt thanks, and ran home as quickly as possible to drop her treasure safely into the box, where it was destined to keep its poorer copper brother in company for many a long year. The Christmas holidays were soon over, and then it was difficult for Mary to keep up with her daily lessons and her Sunday school study. The latter meant weekly visits to the farmhouse for reading the Bible. What with these and her home duties, sometimes weeks passed without Mary having time to earn a penny towards the purchase of a Bible. Sometimes, too, she was rather late in reaching home on the Saturday evenings, and now and again Molly was uneasy about her. For Mary would come by shortcuts over the hills, a long ways which, however safe in the daytime, were rough and unpleasant, if not dangerous after dark. In these long winter evenings, the daylight vanished very early. It was on one of these occasions that Molly was working at her loom and anxiously waiting for her daughter. Surely Mary had never been as late as this before. "Mary ought to be home by now," she said aloud, breaking a silence disturbed only by the noise of her busy loom. "It's as dark, and there's no moon tonight. The way's a rugged one if Mary comes the short cut across the fields, and she's not one to choose the long road if she can find a shorter, bless her. She's more than after her time. I hope no harm's come to her," and Molly walked to the window and looked out. Just then a light step bounded up the door. The latch was lifted, and Mary's young figure entered the cottage, her dark eyes shining, her cheeks flushed, a look of eager animation overspreading the whole of her bright face and seeming to diffuse a radiance round the cottage. "Well, child, what have you learned today?" Molly asked. "Have you studied your lesson for Sunday school?" "Aye, that I have, and a beautiful lesson it was," Mary responded. "It was the lesson and Mr. Evans together that kept me so late." "How so, Mary?" Molly asked, relieved to see her daughter home safely. "I've been so uneasy, fearing lest something had happened to you." "You needn't have been so, Mother," Mary replied, with quiet assurance. "God knew what I was about, and He would not let any harm come to me. Oh, Mother, the more I read about Him, the more I want to know. And I shall never rest until I have a Bible of my own, but today I've brought home a big bit of the farmer's Bible with me." "What do you mean, Mary?" her mother asked in dismay. "How could you do such a thing?" "Oh, only in my head, of course," Mary replied, laughing. Then she added, "and in my heart." "And what is this bit?" her mother asked. "It's the 7th chapter of Matthew, Mary," I said. "Our Sunday lesson was from the 1st verse to the end of the 12th verse, but it was so easy and so beautiful that I went on and on, until I'd learned the whole chapter. And just as I'd finished, Mr. Evans came in and asked me if I understood it all, and when I said that there were some bits that puzzled me, he was so kind and explained them. If you like, I'll repeat the chapter for you." So Molly pushed away her work, while Mary sat down on a stool. Then, beginning at that 1st verse, she repeated the whole chapter without a single mistake, without a moment's hesitation, and with a tone and an emphasis that showed her love and understanding of the words she had learnt. When Mary repeated the verse, "Ask, and it will be received," Molly saw her eyes shine and her cheeks aglow, and knew that she was thinking about the Bible that she had set her heart on. She had no doubt that Mary was praying for the Bible often enough, even when, as her mother, she knew nothing about it. And the Lord would give it to Molly some day. Of that she was certain. Yes, Molly knew. Her Mary would have her Bible. Again, Mary repeated the words of Jesus that she had learned so perfectly. "Ask, and you will receive. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks will receive, and anyone who seeks will find, and the door will be opened to him who knocks." Matthew 7:7-8. That concludes our reading for today. Please join us again tomorrow. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we look forward to reading more.